Watcher, welcome to Monstrosities Mon Amour, where we celebrate the things that other folk slag off. I'm John Grindrod, a writer of unremarkable height and unreconstructed geekery. I'll be meeting people who'll run at me with their enthusiasm for monsters major and minor, places that get a bad press, and cultural artefacts that need to be rescued from the bin. Today, I've been kidnapped by Mike Althorpe, the devious mind behind the London Ambler architectural walking tours, among other things. He's driven me off in the boot of his Austin Maxi, and now here we are. Hello, Mike. Charming spot you brought us to. Where are we?
Hello, John. We are in Corby's 1973 bus station.
Lovely. And can you describe it? What's it like?
Corby bus station is a subterranean wonderland of brutalist concrete, fried food, and whizzing buses and bus exhausts. This space was part of the Phase 2, I believe, of Corby Town Centre development. It was led by the Corby Development Corporation, following a design by John Maiden of Birmingham from the
swanky.
1960s. Yes, but I don't think he had much to do with it afterwards. But Corby bus station was a big part of my childhood and a very exciting and thrilling urban experience in a place that really lacked urban experiences.
Can you remember what your first experience was with it?
Yeah, absolutely. The bus station sits at one end of the second phase of the 70s town centre development, and it sits on the edge of a hill. So it came in on the level, basically, from the 1950s bit of the new town, and then it gradually kind of descended. To get to the bus station, you went down a huge hole in what was essentially a shopping centre, down the town's only occasionally working escalator into this underworld where buses are moving around. So you're going down 3 stories, and I just remember always, and I'm sure lots of people my age in the town, and a bit older, I suspect, will remember that sensation of descending into this space where other things happened.
That sounds like incredibly dramatic as a thing. I mean, that really would stick with you as a kid. Also, sort of going down and sort of like on the only escalator in the town is kind of pretty dramatic in itself.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it was an absolute cathedral, a dirty cathedral of a space. So I always remember going down on this escalator, which of course made this slightly haunting creaking noise, but you had the roar of buses. So basically you were going down onto a road island, essentially, where the buses were in and out and around the bottom. But as you look back up, you had this fantastic waffle soffit, this concrete lattice work above you, which was all murky and stalactites. It was a decrepit space, but really intoxicating. I mean, that was mainly the diesel fumes I was probably breathing in. I was probably
literally intoxicating. All these people smashed out of their brains, wandering around, getting on the wrong bus.
And it was really, it was also had an edge to it as well. I think lots of people avoided the bus station. It was
why was that?
Well, you could catch the bus from other areas, where normal bus stops on the street, on the level. So one end of town had kind of gained a reputation, I suppose, the kind of darker side of town, which also just added to the excitement of it. But as you went down into this incredible space, the roar of buses manoeuvring around, this darkness, but also this fantastic greasy spoon calf at the bottom.
I mean, you've got to love a greasy spoon calf.
No, absolutely. And I remember years later, I saw Nighthawks, the painting by Edward Hopper. And I remember just thinking, that's the cafe in the Corby bus station, this orange glow in an otherwise black-blue world tainted by diesel fumes.
That sense of despair that emanates from Nighthawks.
Well, but also despair and optimism with this bright orange glow, this kind of warm glow, and the air inside the cafe wasn't any better than the diesel fumes outside. It was, the sort of greasy spoon where you can see the grease in the air, you can feel it on your skin before you taste anything. But it was just really exciting for us. It was a thrilling urban experience in a predominantly 1950s new town. So this kind of perfect modernist megastructure of the Arndale, Cumbernauld kind of idiom, that sort of style, this multi-level city, because you had the bus station at the bottom, but you also had the service streets to the shops above. And as you go in the other way, you hit piazza, I suppose you'd call it creatively, and shopping parades. Then above that, offices. Above that, flats, aerial walkways, and then a cinema piled on top of this thing. So it was a real vertical program, just like Cumbernauld, just like cities all over the UK at that time were seeking to create. So Corby had its own version, and to me it was just incredibly exciting. It was a destination, but as I said, I guess a lot of people just thought it was a bit dodgy and didn't want to go to that end of town, so they didn't catch the bus in the daylight. But the best thing as well, and this is uniquely Corby, is that when you got down to the bus station, there was a National Express travel shop opposite the cafe, and the sign on the side of the travel shop said, "Book here for Scotland." And for those of you who, your listeners who don't know Corby, it was known as Little Scotland on account of mass migration throughout the 30s, 40s and 50s, right up to when my family arrived in the 70s, to the English Midlands from Scotland to work at the steelworks. And so that the legacy of that connection was that you could get a direct bus to Scotland from Corby bus station. So again, that idea of architectural space, but also the promise of travel, and I suppose amplified at a time in the 80s when I was a kid, when we didn't have a train station. So
now this is a peculiar thing, that Corby didn't have a train station, at that point, and that, in fact, for years, for a really, really long time. It's only recently had a railway station.
That's right, until around 2007, I think, 2006, 2007. I mean, they gave it a go in the 80s, but it was a shuttle to Kettering. But yes, it had the dubious claim of being the largest town in Europe without a train station. And the exoticism of Corby really was at its kind of peak in the 80s and 90s. We're going through some quite tough times economically. When the town went, native, I suppose, it was kind of on a bit of a limb, I think, economically. But also culturally, very, very different from the rest of Northamptonshire. And it being a new town as well. So spatially, these monuments in the centre of the town and, elsewhere really had very little to do with the ironstone cottages of the villages and towns nearby, which was a badge of honour for me, I think.
Yeah. What sort of place was it you were living in?
I lived in a development corporation estate, early 1960s. I guess quite classic new town, a kind of, essentially cul-de-sacs and winding streets, but done on a system of, I suppose, Radburn principles, where you have your precincts and your walking routes and your green lawns with no front fences or walls. And then
Radburn was that thing where you split out the cars and the pedestrians, wasn't
exactly.
it? Where you put your kind of garages somewhere else so you could walk about without being run over, because there was that big fear, wasn't there, of the car in the 50s and 60s.
So we hung out in the close. That's where all the cars were. But the intended routes were meant to be the green spaces out front. And everyone entered their houses from the back. Nobody used their front door.
Really?
It was always through the close. And it was quite, a funny thing. It always, I don't know, even using the word close has a slightly Glaswegian kind of tense to it. It feels, I didn't realise how exotic it sounded until I started talking about it.
I mean, it is sort of curious, that Scottish connection with Corby, that because of the steelworks, it kind of attracted this enormous kind of influx. And the population has remained very Scots over the years. The generations have changed and stuff, but actually the real kind of core of Corby remains this amazing Scottish population.
That's right. And I mean, it's definitely diversified over the last 15 years or so. Plenty of people, the arrival of the train link to London brought Londoners up the tracks. But there is a kind of cultural side, a kind of heritage, which is completely unique to the place. And I mean, a lot of the accents, I suppose, were a little thinner than they were, but you only have to do a little bit of digging and everyone can trace Scotland or Ireland, actually, as well, and parts of Eastern Europe as well. It's a sizable people with Polish grandparents when I was at school as well, which is another unexpected thing going on in the English Midlands.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, sort of going back to the bus station, I was poking around looking for stuff about it. I found on the Bus UK forum somebody saying that it was surely one of the worst creations of mankind as a whole, which, compare it to nuclear war, the Macarena, and it can't be that bad. But
it's definitely up there. I mean, I should say that the bus station is no more. So we are in an imaginary world right now in terms of bringing it back to life. The town, since the 90s, the noughties, was sold on, and they've taken chunks out of it. So a lot of the megastructure that was the shopping centre, of which it was a part, is still there, and it's kind of been reinvented. I think Lend-Lease even own it, or somebody like this. But they took the bus station down because it was deeply unloved. I'm using this discussion as part of the campaign for for new memories to come out on it.
Yeah, well, exactly, because it's very easy for that period, the kind of like 80s and 90s was a really bad period for buses. It was the point where they all got deregulated. It was a bit of a free-for-all, and actually at that point, when the cultural dreams of the moment were massive shoulder pads and Howard's Way, that actually buses didn't really look like they were doing that, did they? And now I think we kind of live in an era where buses are much more beloved again, and the idea of kind of travelling by bus hasn't got that kind of stigma that it had maybe then, where all of these political decisions would be made to undermine buses all the time. And actually the bus station, as an extension of that, becomes a place that people don't love and they don't like. And lots of them get kind of trashed in that period. And really it's only when we get to sort of like the early 2010s and Preston bus station is rescued, and there's suddenly this interest in bus stations again. People are beginning to appreciate bus stations for what they are, which is a sort of amazing kind of democratic way of travelling. And at their best, they're like an airport in your town. They are a little transport hub full of like people doing different stuff and going their various ways. And you all meet at that one little moment or long moment, depending on how long you have to wait for your flipping bus. I feel like they did get really ignored and demonised. And unfortunately, this is a bus station that got demolished in the middle of all that. It got demolished at the tail end of that period where people were really, really not loving the bus station or the bus.
Yes. And I think as well, the bus station almost became a bit of an emblem for what we'd done wrong in the post-war period. Like so many other towns and cities across the UK, there's always a modernist monument to point a finger at, or to say that a step too far, or it just didn't work. But I think the whole of the town, I mean, like many new towns, were opened with great optimism and enthusiasm. I mean, the Queen Mother opened it in 1973. It was the climax of her tour. If you go online, somebody's published the walking route that she did. She had 7 stops around the new town centre, and this was stop 7. So it was the climax of her tour. She finished at the bus station.
Got on the royal bus at the end of it and drove out.
The royal stagecoach to Market Harbour or Northampton. But no, again, this idea, as you say, like, as far as I was concerned, as a little kid going up the town with my mum, that this was, as close as I could get to an airport at that time, or even the idea of other and this transformative space, which was quite unlike anything in the town.
Also, this idea that, unlike an airport, you're actually travelling down into the depths of the town rather than kind of going up, ascending into somewhere where you can see where you're going. In fact, you've got the complete opposite, and you're like disappearing into this subterranean landscape of diesel fumes and fried eggs. It's a bit weird. I mean, that is a bit weird, that idea.
It is, but I think there was always the kind of pattern to my trip, at least. My trips up the town, and my mum always kind of finished at the bus station or the taxi rank, because Corby's also a taxi town, which is probably, why the buses didn't thrive as anticipated. It's often, cheaper to get a taxi. I think another claim that Corby had at one point was more taxis per head of population than London. Which is, because of the new town layout. I think that's true of a lot of new towns. Taxis do very well. No,
I'm in Milton Keynes, and the taxis here win over the buses, like 1,000 to 1, pretty much.
But it's funny, actually. I only just thought of it just then, but my journey or my experience of a day up the town never started at the bus stop. So I wasn't ascending to light. I was always descending depths, which which is
And
kind
do
of
you think that's a reason? That's one of the reasons why it wasn't very beloved. I mean, it's sort of interesting, reading that quote about one of the worst creations. That it wasn't a loved building, and it's really interesting hearing you talking about loving it. Particularly as a kid, kind of like it being very, very exciting. Do you think it was fair that people didn't like it?
Well, I don't think it had a brilliant starting point, and that's no comment on the Queen Mother, but it's
it can all be traced back to that moment.
I read somewhere a long time ago that the original intention of the entire shopping centre and this kind of phase 2 of the expansion of the town from the late 60s to 73, it was meant to be an indoor shopping centre. It was meant to be like a proper American mall, an indoor Arndale, like many cities had. But there were budget cuts everywhere. And I suspect that was perhaps part of the death knell in terms of setting it on a course where maintenance was going to be, really impossible. And of course, the story of the post-war experience, these towns and councils were given these mega structures. And then a few years later, the budgets for maintaining these things were completely removed. As a structure, I think it was inherently flawed. One of my great memories as well of diesel fumes was also just constant dripping water through this structure.
Ooh, everyone's favourite.
Yeah, and you could see it was a real neglected beast, but it was, I just thought it was part of its kind of ogre charm.
That sort of modernist cave is very exciting. As a kid, that is hugely appealing because it's like an adventure just in the middle of your town, isn't it?
No, exactly that. That is exactly how it felt. Going up the town with your mum was an adventure, right? When you were, just finished nursery or up until the age of 9 or 10, when you're tagging along. And as I say, when your horizons aren't yet so broad. I mean, we used to have trips to London occasionally. Blew my mind. So, but as I say, the bus station was the closest to that I could get.
So if the bus station had been protected like Preston bus station and it was still there, could it have been renovated and turned into this lovely modernist relic that people would enjoy? Or do you think the people of the town would still kind of be grumbling about it?
I think we'd still be grumbling. We'd be looking at what Kettering had or didn't have, always looking over our shoulder at the other nearby towns. It's very competitive in Northamptonshire. I think it's really interesting because it was absolutely vast. When I was a little bit older, I could kind of get a better sense of scale. It was triple height inside. You could stack double-decker buses on top of each other.
And who wouldn't want to do that?
Well, I'm just trying to think of what it could have been. I mean, it would have been amazing indoor market space, if they could, a kind of vertical, huge space. If they'd kept the weather out properly, I'm sure somebody would have been able to take it on. But, it was a colossal structure. And I think from the outside, its bunker brutalism form, it just wasn't what people wanted or what people aspired to, I suppose, at that point. And as I said earlier, I don't think it was that not brilliantly well used because there were alternatives nearby that people preferred to use.
What's there now?
Well, this is the tragedy. There's nothing really there now. There's a surface car park. So they had knocked it down. I think they had ambitions to build and they probably still have ambitions to build a IKEA or to attract somebody because that end of the town, even though they've sawn off the bus station, you're still 4 stories up in the air because of the drop of the hill. So the structure still leaves you on a cliff edge. So there's a flight of steps down where there was the escalator, but a big kind of void, essentially. A nice view over the southeast of the town, but it's awaiting somebody to kind of fill the space. So yes. That kind of just rubs it in a little bit, that they haven't even worked out anything better to do with it.
There's a story of that happening to buildings all over the country, isn't there? The Get Carter car park was sort of another one where, it was kind of like, we've got rid of this and we put, just a surface car park and then a supermarket. It's all a bit temporary. Do you think these formative journeys down the escalator into the weird sort of bowels of Corby to get a bus, it doesn't seem like a coincidence that you've ended up obsessed with architecture and journeys as your life?
This is exactly why I wanted to talk about it. I hadn't appreciated just how influential that had been in terms of just, spatially, that kind of evocation of a place. And, I guess maybe that's that experience, maybe early experiences of London, of descending the underground, the excitement of the escalator and journeys beyond. Because you get that now, don't you? Everyone gets that in London. So again, there was parallel experiences on the odd occasion I did manage to go to London with my parents or my gramps, and then being able to emulate the experience. But I suppose, the idea of Scotland at the end of it felt incredibly exciting, but I never actually caught a bus to Scotland. I think they'd stopped them by the time I was kind of aware of what was going on as a teenager.
Shame, isn't it? Have you ever seen that amazing documentary from 1970, A Long Way from Home, part of the Curious Character of Britain BBC series?
I didn't know.
Oh, it's great. It's on YouTube. A recommended viewing. It's sort of fascinating because it's full of weird ghosts of the town that aren't there anymore, buildings and places that have disappeared, but also those curious survivors like the Strathclyde Hotel, an extraordinary building, and it's still going.
Well, absolutely. And this is kind of part of the battle for the soul of the town, to prevent it becoming just anywhere in the English Midlands. The Strathy, as it was called, at some point in the 80s given a thoroughly and horribly English name, Grosvenor, which was quite upsetting given the Scottish heritage of the town. It never made any sense to it. It's almost like Northamptonshire asserting itself over those unruly Scots. But this is it. I think there's a real campaign to, it's a modernist town. It's a modernist project. And some of these brutalist landmarks are, they are part of the DNA of the place. And it will never be a ironstone village. And it shouldn't try to be. It should really, my thoughts are it should really kind of wear this as a badge of honor of being other amidst a landscape of so many really very dull places. I've just slagged off the whole of the Midlands there. Sorry.
Yeah, you have. Yeah. You've managed to create a new monstrosity while defending the minor one. So well done there. Good. Thank you very much. So you've also chosen a minor monster to go with your major monster, and a bit of a change of pace. What have you chosen?
I have chosen the 1987 film Batteries Not Included.
Excellent. Which is a film that is called Asterisk Batteries Not Included, we must point out. That it's one of the very few films that's got an asterisk in the title that isn't replacing a swear word.
So I was thinking about this when you asked me, John, and I suppose the monster isn't the film itself. The monster, the little monster, is nostalgia. Because it's I think what's interesting about this film is that it's dismissed very readily by lots of people as kind of saccharine, as a bit cheesy, a bit overly, nostalgic. But it was one of my favourite films when I was a kid. And again, we've just been talking about, I suppose, experiences as a child which become formative in terms of how you view the world, your experience of architecture, your experience of place. But this was a film, I think, that turned me on to what the Lower East Side was. So Batteries Not Included. Sorry.
But it's quite interesting, that you were talking about it kind of like, being, as a child watching it, because almost all the characters in it are elderly. Mm. And, and it's actually them looking back on this place as it was, a place that they've kind of lived their whole life and they've got all these memories there. Mm. And sort of interesting as a kid coming to it and watching it. The story is sort of quite, it's a bit of a fairy tale, isn't it? Do you want to briefly cover the plot?
So basically, this is a film about an elderly couple who are among the last of their generation in a neighborhood of tenements somewhere on the Lower East Side, East Village of Manhattan, New York City. And redevelopment is looming, and the threat of displacement and removal is everywhere around them. So they are the last of a kind in a neighborhood which has fallen to pieces. And somehow their situation, they're saved by AI, I think, alien robotics. which is quite a contemporary term for now. But these things fly in, and they're kind of robotic fixers, repairers. And again, that's very timely now because we talk about repair and mend and architecture a lot today.
Absolutely, it's a kind of robot repair shop going on.
So they repair and they, I don't want to spoil the ending, but they save this elderly couple's world where everywhere else is falling apart. But I think what's interesting, again, I didn't make these links, but I've since made these links. Learning about Jane Jacobs and about the urban renewal programs in the US of the 1960s, this post-war experience of America told through this 1 hour, 50 minutes film. The subplot is actually incredibly rich.
So we should mention who Jane Jacobs is. So she was a writer and campaigner that wrote The Death and Life of Great American Cities, which was a really pioneering book about trying to regenerate neighbourhoods rather than knocking them down and replacing them. And the film takes that idea on in a really unexpected way, in that suddenly you've got tiny alien robot spacecraft coming in and taking the place of Jane Jacobs.
Essentially, yes. Somehow the spirit of Jane Jacobs. She was alive then, wasn't she? She was still... Yeah. Anyway, yes, they continue the work that Jane Jacobs started. But they have a thing for heritage. So they beautifully restore this tenement block. And I suppose, in the 80s, when you look back as well, of course, this was part of the architectural discourse about the postmodern experience and how looking again at our cities was what was going on in the 80s and 90s. So again, as I say, this film, from my 7-8-year-old eyes, of course, it was flying robotics and this exciting cityscape. But yes, it whiffs of nostalgia. You've got Jessica Tandy, who was absolutely everywhere in the 80s. And
absolutely. Jessica Tandy, it's sort of really interesting. Basically, in this film, we've got the little robots descending and flying in. And of course, one of our other most celebrated films is The Birds, where the birds fly in to the little town near San Francisco. And that doesn't end as well. I mean, I would say that they probably have a slightly less positive effect on the town than the robots do in Batteries Not Included.
I hadn't made that link, but yes, I think it turns out better this time, for sure.
I think the lesson here is that if you're with Jessica Tandy, do expect a visit from the skies.
And she was
malevolent or positive. It could be anything, but she's going to bring them in.
Yes, she will. And she was in Cocoon as well at a similar sort of time, which again turned out quite well, I think, for the olds in that film. But I think this is why, is saccharine the right word? Is this the right...
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly sentimental, isn't it? I mean, it really, really is. And you've got 1940s jazz music playing all the way through it. So you've got high-tech robots and CGI. It's probably pre-CGI, isn't it? It's like actual model making flying around. You've got all that stuff going on, but to a sort of cutesy little jazz soundtrack, bringing a diner back to life and elderly couples dancing to jazz in dilapidated apartments and stuff.
In 1987, that was bang on trend because Jive Bunny was also in the charts. And actually, 7-year-old, 8-year-old me, just this stuff was everywhere. It's easy, isn't it, when you're a kid? That stuff you end up dancing with your parents or your grandparents or an older aunt or uncle to that stuff. Yeah, and I think the curious thing is, perhaps troubling. It's just like nostalgic for a place I knew nothing of and a past I'd never been part of. I think that's the monster. Potentially, because I don't think that's healthy, is it? But it was, but it's a study of history, and it opened my eyes to an experience of New York and this intimacy with a place which I'd only get to when I was 29. The language of the streets, or the acts, all of that stuff. New York is a city that's in 1,000 films, but for me, this one was quite significant.
Lovely. Well, I mean, I think they're both great things to reclaim. I think Batteries Not Included is one of those films where, even if that's not considered a monster by anyone, has been sort of forgotten. I mean, it's one of those films that was ubiquitous in its video store presence. I mean, it would just be everywhere for years, and it was always in the way of something you did want to watch. There was always that. That was always there. And then it's just kind of been forgotten. And next to kind of E.T. and even Cocoon, it's faded and become this memory that most people have actually forgotten they've ever seen that film if they have seen it.
Yes.
And then the bus station has disappeared as well. So it's very interesting that you've chosen two things, one which is about somewhere that has been demolished and one that is about somewhere that is demolished, one that is somewhere that disappeared. Would you get the Batteries Not Included robots to come and repair the bus station and bring it back to life?
Yes, I would. Yes. I can't remember what kind of summoning call Jessica Tandy uses to get them to come in the first place. I think it's her husband who makes a plea. But yes, I'd perhaps give that a go, see if they could be encouraged to return to Earth and sort out Corby's Phase 2 town centre.
I mean, that sounds like an absolute definite plan. If nothing else comes from this conversation, I think that is an essential lesson.
I think in the absence of central government funding for this, I think it's a valid avenue to pursue.
But there we are. Well, thank you very much for sharing these. I feel enlightened now, and I feel like you've added something very lovely and positive to my world now, knowing about your amazing descent down the escalator into the modernist cave of Corby Bus Station. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing your monstrosities. Thanks so much to my guest, Mike Althorpe. Definitely worth being bundled into the boot of an Austin Maxi for that. You can find out more about Mike and his architecture tours at thelondonambler.com. And for further excitable monstrosity chat, there will be more episodes along very soon. Thank you for listening, and now go out and hug a bollard. Ta-ra!